Hello everyone, my name is Kim Lopez. I'm a DPhil student at the University of Oxford. Today I'm going to talk about patient profiles. If you don't know anything about the package yet, check the first video first. In this one, I'm going to talk about some other core functions of the package, involving intersections with concept, cohort, and other OMOP tables. Let's dive in. We will start by loading the same libraries that we needed for the first video. So that is patient profiles and dplyr. And we will also create a CDM object using the mock dataset inbuilt in patient profiles. This time, however, we will use both cohort 1 and cohort 2. And as we can see now, these two cohorts have 10 individuals separated into 3 cohort definition IDs. Today we will tackle the intersection functions, and we'll start with addCohortIntersect flag. So this function adds a column to our main cohort with information as to whether the people in the main cohort also belong to the target cohort. So for instance, if I do CDM cohort 1, and then I add cohort intersect flag with cohort 2, we get, let's make this a little bit bigger, we get 3 columns added: cohort 2, 0 to inv, cohort 3, 0 to inv, cohort 1, 0 to inv. And these columns have information as to whether the people in cohort 1 also belong to cohort 2. So cohort 2 is our target cohort. Now, as you see here, the default window as to where this intersection is checked for is 0 to infinity. So we're checking whether people belong to cohort 2 from cohort start date in cohort 1 to infinity. And it's separated into 3 columns because our cohort 2 has 3 cohorts, like the cohort 2 table has 3 cohorts. So for instance, let's check subject number 3 belongs to cohort 2, so here, here, from 1960 to 1978, and this person is clearly in cohort 1 before, so that's why we have a flag. However, individual number 4, for instance, does not belong to cohort 2 after cohort 1. And we can check here, they enter cohort 2 in 1980, whereas they enter cohort 1 in 2001. So as we see here, we're basically adding intersection information. Now, as you might be thinking, this can be very complicated because there's a lot of parameters that you might want to choose. For instance, we might directly not like these cohort 2, 0 to inv names very much. The window information here is not very important because there's only one window we're checking. So we can change name style and ask for only cohort name. This will basically give us exactly the same information, but the name variables of the columns will be way more targeted to what we want. Perhaps we're not interested in cohort 1 and cohort 3, the subset ones from our big cohort 2. So we can just ask for a target cohort ID 2, and then because we won't need the cohort name for the name style, we can just cohort 2, and then we'll just have the information for the cohort 2, which are the people who have cohort ID 2 in our big cohort 2. The names are a little bit confusing. I'm sorry about that. Now, let's check other things that we might want to do with addCohortIntersect flagged. So for instance, we might want more than one window. In that case, we probably don't want to change the name style. To do that, we would ask for a window and would give the list of windows that we're interested in. So maybe we want from -infinity to -1, and then also from 0 to infinity, the one we just had. Oof. There you go. And this will give us two columns, cohort 2 minus infinity to minus 1, cohort 2 0 to infinity. So what we say here is that subject number 1, for instance, has a record in cohort 2 that starts before this cohort start date, and also has one that overlaps or is after this cohort start date. Another thing we could ask for is to change target start or target end. So basically, we might only be interested, instead of overlap, on whether the entrance to cohort 2 happens after or before cohort start in cohort 1. So to get that, we just need to ask for target end date to be also cohort start date. And this will basically treat our cohort 1 as a point, just the cohort start date. So now here we see that the entrance to cohort 2 for individual 1 happens after cohort start date, but we were getting here before cohort start date, but we were getting a 1 as a flag before, because that entrance overlaps with the pertinence to cohort 1. So the end of cohort 2 was after the start of cohort 1, and that overlap was being counted as existing in cohort 2 after start date of cohort 1, which is true, but perhaps that's not what we're interested about. So just make sure that you are using the parameter exactly as you want to. There's other things you can choose, as you can see here: target start date, you might want to censor, etc. But I'm not going to go more into this. Similar to the whole addCohortIntersect flag, we might want to add cohort intersection information, but not a flag. We might want to know how many days until the individual belongs or starts belonging to the other cohort. And in that case, we'll use cohort intersect days. So in this case, we'll also check for cohort 2, and maybe, why not, we'll also ask for only target cohort ID 2. So in this case, we see that the majority of people don't start belonging to cohort 2 after the start of cohort 1, except for subject ID 3, subject ID 10, which happens in roughly 3,000 and 2,000 days after cohort start date. Similarly, perhaps we can ask for cohort intersect date, which will give us the date of the start of these belonging to the new cohort. Or we can ask for cohort intersect count. Let's not require target cohort ID here. And this one will give us the counts of how many records do we have for each of these people. So in this case, it's only 1, but perhaps, and especially with different windows, we have people having multiple counts of whatever we're checking. That might not be true for cohorts, but it could be true for tables, for instance, which we'll see in a second. These 4 kind of core functions, the intersect count, date, days, and flag, here we use for cohorts. We can also use for OMOP tables in general. So let's suppose, now that we know a little bit how this works, that we want to know for CDM cohort 1, so for our main cohort of 10 peoples, which of them had visits before cohort start date. For that, we would need to use addTableIntersect flag. We wouldn't use addCohortIntersect because the visit occurrence table is not a cohort, it's a table in the database. We would specify that the table name we're interested in is visit occurrence. And because it's before, and by default, the window is from 0 to infinity, we should change the window to minus infinity to minus 1. And let's just ask for the name style to be visit before, as we'll only have 1 extra column. So as we see, 7 people out of the 10 in cohort 1 had a visit before cohort start date. Now, instead of addTableIntersect flag, we can ask for addTableIntersect count. In this case, instead of a 1 or a 0, we get the count. So some people had 3 visit occurrences before cohort start date, 2, 1, or 0. Now, we might also want to ask for the date. In this case, we will by default, let's actually check the default here, but by default, we will get the date of the first visit in that window. So the first visit that subject ID 7 has before cohort started, which is 1988, is in 1975. But we might want to know the last, in which case we would use this parameter called order, and we would require last. So as we see here now, this information has changed for number 7, for instance, who we saw had multiple visits before cohort start. And their last visit was in 1984, which was before still obviously cohort started, because that's the window we've asked. But as you see here, we can require other things, such as change target date again, censored date, or require an observation. As always, for all these little parameters that you can tune, check the website. There's plenty of documentation as to what all of these mean. We've used addTableIntersect date, day, count, and flag so far. There's a fifth one in this case called addTableIntersect field. This one provides information on the specific value of a field of the table we're interested in. So this is particularly useful, for instance, for measurements. I'm going to provide an example for a condition occurrence, and we'll add information for all the people in cohort 1 on how many, what records, what condition occurrence IDs they have after cohort start. Now, as you can think, this is not something we would usually do, because that would add too many columns in almost any study you can think of. But in this case, this mock database is pretty small, so this is something feasible. Now, let's actually check first the documentation for addTableIntersect field. And as I said, we will just call one addTableIntersect field. Let's choose a stable name condition occurrence. And in this case, we need to specify what field we're interested in. So in our case, we'll put condition occurrence ID. Oh, I didn't write this well. There you go. So as we see here, for each person, we have added this condition occurrence, conditions occurrence ID 0 to infinity is the window by default, as we know. And these are condition IDs. So if we actually check the condition occurrence table itself, we see that indeed this subject number 9, for instance, has condition occurrence ID 1, which we see here as well. Or this subject ID 1 has this condition number 3. We see here that that is true in this line here, etc., etc., etc. And as before, we could change the window, we can change the order, we can allow duplicates, etc. So there's a lot of different parameters we can choose here. Now, in a similar fashion to addTableIntersect, we have another bunch of intersection functions around concepts. So addConceptIntersect flag, addConceptIntersect count, ConceptIntersect day, ConceptIntersect date, and addConceptIntersect field. And in a similar way, we'll add information taken from the concept table. You can check it in the website or in the documentation, but it works in a very similar way to what we've discussed today. I know this is a lot, they're not easy functions, and there's a lot of parameters, but I encourage you to try on your own and play a little bit with this inbuilt dataset even, and you will get a grasp of how they work pretty easily. With this, we've arrived at the end of the tutorial today. I hope you learned something valuable and stay tuned for the third video of this series. Bye!